listeners. My gosh, what an inspiration and so humbling. Wow. I am an alcoholic. My name is Ashley. It's really good to be with you. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for asking me to speak. It's a privilege and an honor. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It has changed and saved my life. My sobriety date is the 30th of December, 2006. I think that's a miracle for an alcoholic of my description. And my home group is the Beacon Group in Boston, Massachusetts. There's a lot of Boston folks in the house, and I'm really pleased to hear that there are people from all over who are attending this meeting. And I really want to share a message tonight about what it was like for me as a newcomer and what I did to stay sober, what I've done to have continuous sobriety, and to share what it was like and how much I had a very low emotional bottom, with all the pain and the grief and the trauma, and how I found a solution here in our fellowship and in our program. So I really appreciated the reading from We Agnostics. Lack of power was my dilemma. I was very powerless over alcohol, and my life was really unmanageable. But I want to share a little bit of my background first. I come from generations of alcoholism. My great grandmommy was an alcoholic. She was a flop house alcoholic and died on the streets in Eastern Kentucky. And when the social worker came to inform her daughter, my Nana, that my great grandmommy, her mother, was dead from alcoholism, my Nana said, "Well, what does that have to do with me?" And, I share that anecdote because my grandmother was so bitter and so traumatized and so damaged by her mother's drinking, because alcoholism is a disease of relationships, and it says that in step 8 in our 12 and 12, that defective relations with other human beings is usually the cause of all my woes, including my alcoholism. And before my great grandmother died of alcoholism, she managed to murder my great grandfather and burn down the family business. And so there's just all kinds of dysfunction and pain in the family. And there was a lot of suicide. Multiple family members killed themselves. And, both my parents were alcoholics. I was raised in an alcoholic home and experienced a lot of criminal abandonment and neglect. And, I say all of that to highlight how much I've healed in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous by reading our literature, by having a sponsor, by going to a ton of meetings, by working with others, sponsoring them just out of the book. I don't have to be a genius. I just have to follow along the text and, do follow the instructions in the chapter, working with others. But all of that story that I tell you doesn't actually make me an alcoholic. It makes me a member of our Al-Anon family groups in good standing. But what makes me an alcoholic is what I experienced by reading our chapter at the front of the book in the doctor's opinion, is that I really have this preoccupation with alcohol. The book calls it an obsession even. And when I'm around alcohol, it's like it looms so large in my imagination. I remember once I was in Guatemala, and I decided I was going to drink that night. And so I ordered something at the restaurant, a bottle of wine or champagne, which was my drink of choice. And it was taking so long to arrive that I became agitated. Our literature describes it as restless, irritable, discontent, but I was so impatient for that first drink that I actually left my colleagues at the table and went to the bar and was like demanding a drink at the bar to get some booze in me before what I had ordered at the table arrived. That was how much I needed that first drink. And, the book tells me that when I got that first drink, I would experience a sense of ease and comfort. And that absolutely was my experience. Everything was easier, everything was lighter, I was more social, but then that preoccupation remained with me. And I don't know if y'all have seen it, but there's a movie about, it's a Danish film, it's about binge drinking actually. And my husband was saying to me that the euphoria and the lightness and the celebration and the sense of camaraderie was how he experiences drinking. And I said, well, absolutely not for me, because even when I'm in a crowd, I'm thinking, where's the next one coming from? Is it going to be cold enough? Is it going to be good enough? And, one of the other things I did with my drinking was I always upgraded the quality of my friendships, because that would justify buying a nicer bottle of wine. So I just was, and I consider this to be my obsession with alcohol. And the next line that I really like in the doctor's opinion, after it talks about how this phenomenon of craving kicks in, that I want more, one is too many. And for me, in my case, 3 or 4 is one is too many, and 3 or 4 is never enough. That my problems pile up on me and become astonishingly difficult to resolve. And I had emotional problems by the truckload. So how I got to Alcoholics Anonymous was really through the back door. We all get here in our own way. My sibling went to treatment for an eating disorder, and I went to her family program. And on the first day of her family program, they said to me, boy, you need to run like heck to the Al-Anon family groups. And I'm like, she snacks. My grandfather was an alcoholic. I didn't even mention him at the beginning of my share, but he was an alcoholic too. And he was the only one I really had identified at that point. What does that have to do with me? Now, in the meantime, of course, I had this family packet to fill out, or this packet to fill out during her family week, about sex addiction, about this, about that. And there was an alcoholism questionnaire. And of course, I changed my answers so that I only answered yes to 3 of them, because if you answered yes to more than 3, you might have a drinking problem. So I was already, bargaining and lying to myself, because I most assuredly did not want to be an alcoholic. I was not willing to give up my drink. And they ended up doing an intervention on me for my adult child issues. And I stayed and I did a lot of Al-Anon work. But when I went to Al-Anon, when I got out of treatment, I shared literature that was not published by Al-Anon, and I was corrected because it was a healthy meeting that observed the 12 traditions. Because in our, in the 12-step program in which the meeting which we're attending, we only share literature that's published by Alcoholics Anonymous and the Grapevine, or that's published by Al-Anon. So anyway, I got a resentment against Al-Anon and I wouldn't go back, but I knew I wanted recovery. So what was left available to me was open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I knew that the solution was in the literature. So I went to literature meetings, and I went to 7 meetings a week. And I drank while being in AA, open meetings. I didn't go to closed meetings because those are reserved for alcoholics, and I wasn't identifying yet as a member of AA. And I started to identify with what I heard in the literature, that is great obsession of every abnormal drinker, that one day I will be able to control and enjoy my drinking. And then there's that wonderful story in the back of the book. And I was riddled with loneliness. I mean, that was really a chief characteristic of my alcoholism. I was such a lonely person. And so one of the things I did that I highly recommend to newcomers is every night before I went to bed, I read one of the stories that comes after Dr. Bob's story. And I found such comfort in those stories, because, people find a power greater than themselves. They restore their relationships. They have dignity and grace in their lives. They don't necessarily get everything that they want, but they somehow find everything that they need. And those stories just kind of rocked me to sleep and helped me find some peace. But then I also started identifying with their alcoholism, and it kind of ruined my drinking. So I had like a belly full of wine and a head full of AA, and it was very confusing. And, occasionally I would share at the AA meetings, which I should not have been doing. I did not necessarily understand the norms of an AA meeting, and no one in a loving, appropriate way walked me through. And I hope that, that's something that I do today in a gentle way, with guidance and civility and tenderness with newcomers when they don't know the norms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But, that was something I did. And now I can just be a good teacher and a good leader according to our 9th concept of service, which says that good personal leadership at all service levels is a necessity. And then they would just wag that desire chip in front of me. Does anybody have a desire not to take a drink for the rest of the day? And I was like, no, not me. But AA ruined my drinking. That's just the bottom line. And eventually on the 30th of December, after 8 months of this nonsense and this tug of war inside of me, I was at I was at a friend's house and they had, beautiful cheese. And I wasn't an alcoholic, I assure you. I was just drinking the correct wine with the cheese. And, I woke up the next morning with pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I was just going to have one glass of wine and I had three and I didn't know how it happened, and a lot of people drank more than I did, but my emotional bottom was full of despair. And I was just like Bill in his story, pounding my fist on the bar. How did it happen again? And I did have a sponsor, and I called her and she wasn't available, which was unusual because she always picked up the phone. And so I called my recovery buddy, and that's something I really recommend for newcomers, is to have a recovery buddy, someone with whom to talk about, and we'll get into that later. But how did I apply the slogans in my life today? Did I practice HALT? Did I get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Did I make it to a meeting? What was the topic of the meeting? How did I do a spot check inventory today? Just someone with whom I can walk shoulder to shoulder in recovery. So I called my recovery buddy and I said, I think I'm hitting my bottom with alcohol. And I shared with her how I felt. And she said, Ashley, that's how I felt when I got sober too, when I got sober. And this is a woman who had been forced into prostitution, who had lived on the streets and was a victim of human trafficking. And our circumstances were different, but we identified with each other's feelings. And that's so important as a newcomer, is to identify with how we feel. And so I went to a local meeting. I was in a different state visiting friends, and they didn't offer chips at this meeting. But lo and behold, there was someone I knew at that meeting, also from out of state, just a massive coincidence, which is higher power's way of staying anonymous. And he had recently picked up a very special medallion for a big round number anniversary. It was the anniversary also of his mother's death. And he gave me his medallion as my surrender chip. And that's the fellowship in action, just a beautiful act of generosity. And I have not found it necessary to take a drink since then. And that's one of my message for newcomers. I mean, relapse happens. It's not to embarrass or shame anybody, but it's also not necessary to have relapse as a part of your story, just one day at a time. And so I got busy in my step work, and something that was important to me in my step one was to really take a look at my attitudes towards drinking, because they were very distorted, and to look at not only the unmanageability of how I handled alcohol, but the unmanageability of my emotions. I was a rager. I was a reactor. I had all kinds of damaging perceptions about myself. I was filled with self-loathing. I had so much shame from childhood, from the toxicity and the grief and trauma of my childhood. I tried to control everything. There's that very well-loved story in our book, Acceptance is the Answer. And before the famous page where he says, acceptance is the answer to all my problems, and that proportion of acceptance and expectations, the page before that is the page that resonates with me, because he says, if I could just control what's going on outside of me, I would get some relief on the inside of me. And I just wanted the world to be a thermostat where I could just adjust that thermostat, and then I would feel better on the inside. And so my first step was lengthy, and I did do when I, and so I read this first step to my sponsor. And, one of the things I did that I always share this anecdote was, one time I was in my hotel room alone after having had a lot to drink, because sometimes I did drink in great quantities. And I was having one of those quasi emotional experiences where I was just a lush, and I thought, oh, I need somebody to talk to share all these great insights. And I didn't have anybody to talk to because, of course, I was so isolated in my disease. So I called my own voicemail and left myself a message. And then I made myself vomit so I wouldn't have a terrible hangover, and I wasn't an alcoholic. So then the next morning I'm checking my voicemail and I hear this absolute
15 minutes, Ashley.
thank you so much. This absolutely incomprehensible gibberish. And I realize that it's me drunk talking to myself. Boom, I'm at step 2 because this is not sane behavior. This is not sane behavior. And in my step 2, I found that Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that I believe anything. AA is not allied with any sect or denomination or institution. And I'm absolutely given the dignity and the respect of a God of my own understanding, and that no one will have contempt or ridicule or is even allowed to comment on my personal conception of God. I'm given so much dignity and so much freedom to dream up in my imagination the higher power concept that will nurture and guide me and empower me in a way that is sweet and tender and that will connect me to something that feels safe, because I didn't feel safe when I got here. And so, my sponsor really encouraged me to use my imagination, and I made a collage, and it was very nature based because I always wandered in the woods. I'm from Appalachia, and I've changed my God concept before. I have fired my higher power, and I talk about the higher power behind my higher power. And I've got a God that's big enough for my anger and that can handle my questions, that can handle my fear. And, when I've worked with other women in this program, I've had them write want ads, to dream up their ideal higher power like they would their ideal job or their magic wand partner in life. And, it says in our book that the realm of the spirit is roomy and broad. It is open to all people. And so I think that it's important that we jealously guard the freedom of a higher power concept for every individual in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so then I was on to my step 3. And I think this is the most important decision that I make, to turn my will and my life over to the care. That's such an operative word. It's the care of my higher power. And obviously my will is my thoughts, and my life is my actions. And I just ask for guidance, and I pause, and I also want to say that sanity to me is just peace of mind. It's very simple. It's good orderly direction. It's learning how to respond rather than react. And peace of mind, what a gift that is. It's not having a turbulent spirit. And so when I took my first third step, and I've taken the third step in many times and in many contexts, in many situations, I got on my knees with my sponsor. It was very intimate and sweet. But I want to say I can take the first 3 steps, especially as a newcomer, anytime and anywhere, and I can take them about relationships, going over to my parents' house when I was early in recovery. I would go into their bathroom and I would close the door and I would get on my knees and I would say, I'm powerless over my family, and my life becomes very unmanageable when I forget that. I do believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sane behavior. And in this moment, I make that decision. And I remember the first time I ever took the first 3 steps, it was on anxiety because I was eaten alive with anxiety. It was like cans of worms opened up inside of me. And I remember kind of thinking, you know, with insomnia and just desperate for sleep, thinking, oh, those steps, what are those first 3 steps? How do they go? Okay, I'm powerless over this anxiety, and my life is utterly unmanageable by me right now. I do believe that there's some kind of power that can restore me to peace of mind right now. And I make the decision to turn everything over. And then I would go to sleep for 20 or 30 minutes. I would get that relief. I mean, I the first, and this is something, I've been to to meetings in 12 countries, and that doesn't make me good, right, and perfect. It just makes me willing to recover. And we talk about willingness in the spiritual experience in the back of the book, the appendix. And that's what my sponsor taught me, that this program is portable. These steps are portable. I can take them with me into any situation. And the 4th step is such a great turning point for me. I just did a 4th step. I did a 4th step in January. I did a 4th step in August. And, the book gives me a lot of grace to be angry and resentful at people. It says, it's clear that this world and its people are often quite wrong, and it allows me to get those resentments, to get the anger, to get the fear down on paper. And then it asks me, how free do I want to be? How free do I want to be? And it says, do I want to squander the hours that might otherwise be worthwhile? And today I do want to live on a different basis. And so I am prepared to look at it from a different angle, and I start to flip it. And with my sponsor's help and a lot of reading and going to meetings and hearing other people's experience, I start to see where I have set the ball into motion, where I've hung on to my rage, where I have my part in these things. And I see that other people are also suffering the pains of growing up, and they're doing the best they can. And my sponsor was just over here visiting with me today, and she said, presume goodwill, assume love, don't presume malice. And so I followed the instructions in the book, and then I gave away a fifth step to somebody who had me look up the word admit. That's we admit to God and to another person and myself the exact nature of my wrongs. Admit means to grant access. And so I grant my higher power access to those nooks and crannies. It's so cleansing, and it so lightens the load, to grant that access. And it's such a trust exercise, and it's so liberating and freeing. Again, how free do I want to be? And so I love giving away a fifth step. It just is, where I've been clenched, it's very opening. And I typically do it with my sponsor, but I did my fifth step in August with someone that I met on a spiritual retreat who's a cloistered person who lives a life of silence and prayer, and it was beautiful. And then in step 6, and which is companioned with step 7, the way I was taught about those steps is, where am I short? Patience and tolerance and allowing others to be themselves without needing to manipulate or change them, letting people have the dignity of their own experience without commenting or criticizing. And where am I long? And how do I want to get right sized and have my character and my personality in right proportion so that I can be at peace with myself and my fellows? And the willingness to ask my higher power to remove these defects. And guess what? I'm always going to be in situations where I get to practice, because God shows up disguised as my life. God shows up disguised as my life. So I'm always going to get to practice. And then in step 8, I start to build some courage and build some backbone. And I always share that I was taught to make 3 lists when I do my step 8, preparing to make my amends. And it's just a list. I don't have to do anything, just make the list, And my first column is, I'm willing to make my amends to that person now. And I start with the easier, safer people with whom I feel more confident. And the middle list is, I'm not quite ready, and I'm a little frightened, and I'm not. And then the third list is, they ain't going to ever hear from me. I ain't ever making my amends to that jerk, because they did and basta, no way. And then I go on and I start making my amends, right? Because it's important for me to progress through my steps. And what I noticed over time is that the people who were on my not, no, hell no list migrated without my permission to my willing list. And so today, for example, I have restored relationships with my parents who were my perpetrators when I was growing up. And they have changed a lot because I have changed. And my mom hugs me and tells me that I'm an extraordinary woman. And when I was getting ready to make a big decision about something, she listened and she said, you can do this, and you're the only person who can. And I'm getting ready to be inducted into something at my university, and my dad is coming to support me. And, my dad just flew my kitty cat up here to be with me because we travel all the time and we have to move things around. I just have a beautiful relationship with my parents today. And that's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and my being willing to do the work and to follow the instructions in the book. And then in step 10, I grow in understanding and effectiveness. And, what that means is that I get to stay current and I get to stay clean and I get to
5 minutes, Ashley.
Thank you so much. I heard that. I get to understand that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, and that I have choices, and that my sobriety is a choice, and I have drinking dreams still, and they're always the same. They're so they're so undisguised, and my drinking dream is typically I've accidentally drank something that was alcohol, and I think, oh, well, I didn't know it was, so it doesn't count. And then I think, well, I might as well drink more because I've already accidentally had some alcohol and I don't have to tell anybody. But then my integrity kicks in and the fellowship of this program kicks in. And I know that that's not how I want to live my life. And I don't want to go back and pick up another desire chip, because my sobriety date, the 30th of December 2006, is also my papa's belly button birthday. And he was an alcoholic. And I believe that my sobriety date is a gift from him. And I just want to say something about the meditation, the prayer and meditation step before I wrap up. The big book on what we sometimes call the morning pages gives very explicit directions about how to try to meditate. It says that we select and memorize prayers that emphasize the principles we have been discussing. And then in the 12 and 12, it offers a really wonderful prayer with which to start, the prayer that begins, "Make me an instrument of thy peace." And so I just sit and very slowly go through the words of this prayer, and it really slows my mind down. Make me an instrument. And it's a wonderfully effective way to pray and meditate. And then, I chat with my higher power throughout the day. I've asked my higher power, for example, if I think about someone, would you please convert that into a prayer for them? Because I forget to pray for people because I am a little selfish and self-centered, as the book describes me. And then in step 12, I get to learn not only about how to practice these principles in my relationships, but I start to learn about our 12 traditions and our 12 concepts of service and how to practice the entire program. And so in closing, I just want to say, the fellowship is the we in the first step, and it's the meetings. And it's not anywhere in our literature, but it is kind of a thing that gets passed around, like going to 90 meetings in 90 days. I've done that many times. And in early sobriety, there are plenty of people who go to more meetings than that, but I actually went to 7 or 9 meetings a week. And, sometimes we say stick with the winners, and that doesn't mean that we judge, but it means that I have discernment and I don't condemn people who I don't necessarily think are the winners. It just means that I want the best for myself, and that I want to stick with people who know the literature and who are trying to live the solution. And the program is that first section of the book that goes up to Dr. Bob's story. And then there's more fellowship in the back of the book, which are those wonderful stories where people share about their drinking and how they found a power greater than themselves and how they stay sober, and what living a sober, an emotionally sober life is like. So my question for you, now that you're getting sober and you're getting a little bit of time, is how free do you want to be? How free do you want to be? And today I'm a very free woman, and I am so thankful that I've had the opportunity to share a little bit of that with you today. So thanks for the opportunity. I love y'all, and I will close with that. So thank you.
Wow, awesome.
Thank